So let me introduce James. I am so excited that you're here with us, James. I can't remember how many years ago was we met, at least 10, if not longer. Is that right?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. And James is works in Google as an in-house internal organizational development consultant. So James is here to represent the internal lens. What's it like being an in-house coach? James specializes in executive coaching, team coaching, and complex organizational change within the EMEA region, and partners with senior leaders and teams to drive transformation, enhance performance. I'll let James say more about himself, but James is particularly focusing today on his transactional analysis approach to working with teams and team coaching. And I know it's going to be a fascinating presentation. So I'm so glad you're able to join us, James. Let's pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Georgina. It's wonderful to be here. And my Portuguese is very limited, so I'll say bom dia and tudo bem. That's about as much as I can do, but you are also very welcome in this session. So let me present my screen. I will not be sharing slides for much of this session, but I will start with this. And just to the meeting hosts, I can't obviously see the meeting chat in this format, so if anything comes up that you need to alert me to, please talk to me. So let me get the disclaimer out of the way first. I work for a very large and complex global organization, which means that I have to get PR approval and legal approval before I talk about anything to do with this organization. So that's the disclaimer at the bottom of this to get this out of the way right at the beginning. I'm speaking in my own capacity. I will be sharing anonymized examples of what it's like to work in this capacity within Google. But really what this session is all about is around sharing some ideas from the psychology of transactional analysis. Some of you may be familiar with that psychology. That's why at the top right-hand side of the screen, you can see the 3 stacked circles, which represent possibly the best known aspect of transactional analysis, which is ego states. So I'm going to share one idea from transactional analysis that can be applied to teams or groups in today's session. There are many, many more concepts. And I've spotted a few names on the call already who will be familiar with some of this concept. But if you have never heard the term transactional analysis before, it's a humanistic psychology that originated in the US in the 60s, invented by a Canadian psychiatrist. And it continues to be alive today. One thing I want to say, though, is that I use this kind of approach to guide my work in the way that I approach things at Google. It is not the mandated way of Google carrying out its team coaching or doing anything like this. We as internal consultants within Google are at liberty to use whatever schools or approaches that we deem fit that are ethical, basically. And I choose an approach which suits me and allows me to do this. So I think that's probably worth saying. There are not a whole load of me all using the same kind of approach here. This is very much something that I've chosen to invest privately in my own time to develop in. And so outside of Google, I'm a provisional teaching and supervising transactional analyst, and I teach and supervise people like yourselves, executive coaches, organization consultants who want to use and apply this method in what they do. And in the course of doing this, I will illustrate like some realities of working in a large organization. And it was helpful to see that question come up around whether people can, what's it like doing this work when you are employed inside an organization? I think the answer is it's tricky at times, but I'll explore more around that as we go through the session. I think what advantages me is that because there are 14,000 people or more now actually who work in the EMEA part of Google, I don't have that disadvantage of like everyone I come into contact with I have known from before. That doesn't happen for me. So in some ways I can show up like an external consultant, but there are also differences because I'm employed, and there are those expectations on me. So all of that I will kind of unpack as we go through this. So a little bit more. So this is Eric Byrne, the founder of Transactional Analysis. And one of the things that I never ceased to get amazed was that transactional analysis was created not very far from today's Silicon Valley. It has always seemed to be a place of innovation and creativity. And then here I am working for Google, one of those organizations that was also created in that kind of California hotbed of innovation and a crucible of something. I don't know why that part of the world is so attractive to this, but this is where this psychology started. And you'll see all sorts of words in there, but one word I'll pick out by way of illustration is the word contracting. The original writing and thinking about contracting in the coaching world derived from transactional analysis. And now contracting is ubiquitous and everyone uses contracting and the idea of contracting, but it was one of those ideas that originated from TA. And I'll make some references to contracting as I go through this, but that's an example of where all of this comes from. So next slide. These are a variety of books. I looked at this slide just before I came on and realized to anyone that likes life in a very ordered and sequenced way, I've looked at this and I've realized I've got no idea why I jumbled up the years. I think it says something about my thought process. So they don't go left to right in terms of year of publication, which is, well, it could be mildly irritating to some people. But starting on the left-hand side, the idea I'm going to share with you today starts with that book on the left, The Structures and Dynamics of Organizations and Groups. And all of this work that was contained in this book was a psychological take on how teams and groups operate and formed. And I would say even more importantly for me, even though this was written in the 60s, Eric Byrne took a very systemic way to the way that he thought about teams. He was both systemic and psychological. And that is absolutely invaluable to me in the way that I work when I work with teams and groups and organizations. So that diagram is going to be key to what we look at. And I'm going to unpack that diagram with you today. That's what I'm going to share with you. But before we do that, we are going to go into a breakout. And I'm going to give you one question to think about in the breakout. And the question is a word that has already come up, and it's about boundaries. So when you enter your breakout room, what I would like you to reflect on is, what is the importance and the nature of boundaries in team coaching work? So what is the importance and nature of boundaries in team coaching work? And when you come back, I'll invite you to share a sentence in the meeting chat around boundaries. This will be a very short breakout, by the way. So it will be 8 minutes maximum. So when you enter your breakout room, please make sure that everyone gets a chance to share their thoughts. And that's the inquiry. Okay, so let me have a look down this list with some of the items that you came up with. Okay, so contracting makes an early appearance with here, very important. Who is the client? Great connection to boundaries, offering clarity around roles and responsibilities, context, challenges. Love that one about the lands behind the boundaries. Hold that thought. We are going to come and look at that in here. More than I'd first considered. Fantastic, yes. Contracting again, confidentiality, mandates. Okay, interesting. Always be contracting keeps making an appearance here. Yeah. Important to role model and establish the psychological safety that's needed for team coaching. Okay. How wide the scope of the boundaries we hold is, the container, systemic nature, wide spectrum possibilities. Okay, yes, there are loads of really interesting thoughts here. And that's an interesting one around the team and like a team versus a collection of individuals. Again, I will come on to say quite a bit around that. And the boundary around coaching the team leader alongside the team coaching, should you? Yes, yes. So that's an important one around where does the work go? Yeah, yeah. Okay, so loads of contributions there, which I can't possibly do justice to. However, we do have time to hear a pulse from some of the groups. And I'd also be really pleased to hear a pulse from any of the Portuguese speaking groups as well, if that's possible. So I wonder if we might have some brave souls in this group of 170 who would be willing to share with us a couple of minutes of their thinking from their group. So raise your hand if you'd be willing to share or speak up. So, but I'd appreciate. I know it's difficult in a large audience of this size, but. Do we have any? Oh, sorry. Okay, I see a hand. Max, would you like to start us off, please?
Okay, so I think as I remember, we had two main points. The one is the importance of knowing set boundaries and being aware when they move, when they have to be moved, when they are crossed, and to explicitly notice that they are crossed, if they are. And the other one was the invitation to set boundaries whenever someone in the group feels the necessity of doing that.
Excellent. So it sounds like there's a lot of active thinking for you around the boundaries and the nature of them.
Yes, we had a great conversation and it was just flowing. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Max. I'm not sure if this is the order I'm going in, but Sophie?
Yes, so I will say what I think summarized what we talked about. We talked about who are we contracting with, at what level are we contracting, who is the client, what do I own as the coach, and what does each team member and the team own in the process, and all of this to create the psychological safety, psychological hygiene, to establish trust and to create the relationship required to be able to move forward.
Yeah,
that's what I can say.
And I think something I will come on to talk about is that the psychological safety itself could be a form of a boundary, its own right. So I will say more about that later in the session. Okay, great. So I've got a few more hands. Judith, have I said your name right?
Yes, it's Judith, but okay. What we talked, it's boundaries are a sign of professionalism. It's a terminology from the point of view that as coaches, we talk about boundaries, but are we aware of them? And there's the clarity around them. And then we also mentioned, as it's tied to contracting, it needs to be continuously reviewed and discussed where we stand with that. So it's a non-stop exercise, but just getting awareness of the existence of boundaries, I think that in itself is something that's quite important. That should be topic for discussion. Thank you.
Exactly. And sometimes the boundaries may not be visible to us when we commence. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you. Rachel?
Thanks, James. Yeah, we've kind of an interesting discussion. I suppose a lovely kind of consistent theme around boundaries up for discussion and change and move over time. What I loved was some insights on deepening of boundaries. You know, sometimes as people become more comfortable within the teams, the boundaries actually at an eye level kind of deepen as people make themselves more available. And then we talked about the boundary of the coach and the team and how do you anchor yourself as a coach and what are your boundaries and what's the team's work and what's your work. And then finally, maybe a third theme around that piece about the I, we, it, the different identities in the team, and that actually really great conversation is generated at the boundaries of how do I find more of myself, you know, for the team, or what is the team doing to help me step forward. So that boundary is, I find it, and you know, it's great for dialogue at that, to generate really good dialogue for the team.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll hear from one more contribution. Andriana?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So in my group, we discussed about how boundaries help in the role definition within the group, and also how they set the boundary. We discussed about the boundaries within the group, the outside the environment of the group, and also within the team as well, within the team, inside the team. So a question was raised about, are we discussing here about hierarchy or not? And we continued and we came to that it defines roles within the members, and so that it makes the members of the team accountable for their actions. And that's this is what we discussed. Accountable.
Lovely. Yeah, and that's a lovely segue actually around hierarchy and members. So I couldn't actually have asked you to set it up better in terms of what I'm about to share. So I'm going to use a virtual whiteboard to share some ideas with you. And these particular ideas, Bern described them as public structure, as in it's what we can see, but there is a psychological component to what I'm about to share. And it's also a way of, for me, as a whenever I engage in a team coaching assignment, to do my own processing around what is going on with this team that I'm engaging with. It helps me understand. So let me get my virtual whiteboard up. Just a moment whilst the technology works. Okay, so I'm going to draw a diagram, and I'm drawing because as I build this out, it gets more complex. I could have shown you it on a flat slide, but my thinking is that it's actually more human in a way to build this up with my bad drawing, and then you will get a nice, neat diagram afterwards as a kind of a takeaway. So, and I think what I'm always quite amazed with was, for anyone who knows anything about Eric Berne, this material that he wrote about in the 60s, I think it was very, very far-sighted, and I am astonished that it's still relevant today. Actually, you know, it hasn't changed the way that he psychologically thought about teams. I find is still very relevant. And I want to start with right in the center of this diagram, oh, let me get the pen up. Berne liked diagrams. So everything in transactional analysis has a diagram. That's the way that TA kind of works. It's very much at the center of it is that, and if we can create a diagram, we can create greater understanding and greater visual appreciation. And so at the center of this diagram, Berne put the leader. Now, that's a whole nother question around leadership and should there be a leader, etc. But let's just assume normally a team does have a named leader. And so Berne chose to place that leader at the center of his public structure diagram. And then when we think of there being a leader, we also need members. So we draw the membership around the leader. So the first thing, and often this is represented in a conventional organization chart as a series of lines and boxes, but I actually prefer this way that Berne did this. So in a very recent engagement, I was working with a vice president. That's kind of the normal level of leader that I would work with within Google. They were managing a part of the European business for Google. So I know who the named leader is, okay? And in the particular leadership team that this leader was pulling together, there were people with different responsibilities. So we had sales leader A, we had sales leader B, and all I mean by that is that they had responsibilities for different type of sales segments. We then had what we would call a product specialist, a person who led a group of highly technical individuals. You had finance, and you also had HR. So fairly conventional leadership team structure. So far, so good. Berne But as I begin my investigation, then I'm curious about what's impacting this team, and where are the pressures coming in. And this is the bit where Byrne made this much more systemic. So he talked about what is the pressure that is coming into this team. And he called it external pressure. Now, let me qualify that external pressure statement. He simply means in this context, external to the team. And I do want to illustrate that I also always think of a wider system. So here is the wider system. And if you like, this is the outside world. So this would be where customers would reside. You might also have, in Google's case, governments, because they've always got an interest in how technology works. So, and if you imagine these outside stakeholders are introducing pressure into the system all the time. So you've got the outside world, customers, governments, all introducing pressure into the system. But then within the system, you've got pressures going on as well. So there might be another leadership team that is providing external pressure to this team. So this becomes very important to me in my very first contact with a leadership team, is to understand this notion of pressure. And Byrne called these group forces. So what are the forces that are acting upon the particular leadership team that I am looking at? Where are they coming from? So with this particular leadership team that I was working with, one pressure, if you like, was the fact that sales results were not as good as they had been historically. So that intrudes into this team here. That comes right into the real view of this team. You might also have something that comes straight in from outside. Let's say a government has made a change in policy around how a particular piece of business needs to be done. That's another intrusion into the team. And it causes basically what Byrne described as agitation. Every team experiences agitation because no team operates in a vacuum, and they all are experienced to external pressure or forces from the outside world. So one of my very first evaluative questions, whoever the commissioner of the work is, what are the pressures that your team is experiencing from both the outside world and from the rest of the organization? That's my systemic curiosity. And what Byrne argued, and what I truly believe is like a very helpful way to think about this is the reason and the cause of a lot of behavior that you see in a leadership team is as a result of the pressure that a team needs to deal with. So one of the things that we're doing is in this approach that I use within Google is I'm diagnosing all those pressures. Now, the team can have a couple of ways of choosing to respond to that pressure. And what you can get as a result is you can get this green arrow here, and the green arrow would be cohesion. So cohesion is great. In response to these external forces, we as a team, we bond together and we respond to those external forces, and that actually creates increased cohesion for a team. So I'm going into a team and I'm looking and I'm listening for words that demonstrate cohesion between the leadership team and what they're trying to achieve and their purpose. That is also very important in my kind of, whoops, managed to remove the circle. That's also very important in my early diagnosis is, what is the purpose? And if I take a very simplistic example, at one level, you might say, well, the purpose of a sales team is to achieve sales. And most sales teams have a target. Therefore, that's their purpose. That's not what I'm interested in. That's a very superficial purpose. It's not a real kind of purpose. I am looking for, when they talk about purpose, have they as a leadership team defined what is important to them as a collective group of leaders that they are trying to achieve? Because in the TA thinking that Byrne shared, he said, a well-formed team always has a clearly defined purpose that they wish to pursue. So that's the purpose. Now, there is an opposite to cohesion, and that's when you get destructive forces in the team that try to break things apart. And Byrne labeled these as agitation. So I am also looking for agitation in the team as well. And something that I want to say that's really important here is, in the way that we as transactional analysts would think about this, cohesion and agitation are always present. They're natural forces. We'd expect to see them. But what I'm looking for is, what's the nature of the cohesion and what's the nature of the agitation in this team that I'm working with. And by the very nature of the process and the way that I work as well, what I'm inviting the team to do is to increase their awareness of those forces that are causing cohesion, that bring them together, and those forces of agitation which take them apart. And there's a very important thing I want to say about agitation. And I think this is I don't know if this is a unique to Google thing, but often when I'm brought in to work with a new team, I get a new commission, please come in and work with this leadership team. And often I'll be told stories of conflicts between individuals. So it's very, very common. It's like, tell me, like, these two people don't get on, or these functions can't stand each other, or, oh, there's always been conflict between these parts of the team. And I'm not very interested in the individual personalities in this situation. My take on this and my understanding of this is that this conflict or this disruption or this agitation is caused because of the pressure and the forces that are acting upon the team. So if you take, for example, a finance team tends to have more of a policing function, more of a cost control function, and they will often be in a part of a team that wants to spend resources and use resources. So that's a really simplistic example of, it's not about the individuals, it's about the purpose of the particular team within the function, and whether or not they have managed to resolve between themselves that polarity of controlling resource and spending resource, which all teams have to deal with in some way as well. All teams are responsible with this idea of kind of managing resource. So in the way that I would work with this model in Google, we have a way of kind of sort of describing from a sort of a very light touch intervention through to a full, what you might call a white glove service. So I'll explain the white glove service first, as in the highest level of service that we provide. And this is quite, we have to think carefully about whether we can justify this from our own timing point of view. But in the most full extreme of the service that we offer, we will talk to every member of the leadership team one-to-one, and we will also talk to team stakeholders. We will talk to a couple of people who are below the team, and in some circumstances, I've actually even spoken to customers, so that I am building this most holistic picture of the environment in which the team operates, so that I can provide a very rich picture. And here a word or a nod to AI, which has made this work so much easier for us. Now, with the ability to transcribe every meeting, I will seek permission to transcribe the meeting, and then I will use an AI compiler to help me massively accelerate how I generate a set of themes and insights for the team. And usually in this situation, by the way, the commissioner is the vice president or the leader of the team, but sometimes there'll be other partners in there as well, like the HR business partner, and also very commonly in Google we might have a strategy and operations partner. And here I want to introduce a kind of a little sub distinction. Sometimes there's a hidden leader, and in Google sometimes that hidden leader is the strategy and operations lead. That's not always clear to me, and they're not always present. But sometimes I also need to work out who's in this leadership space with this leadership team. So that kind of like do a full diagnosis, full evaluation of a team, one-to-one conversations with everyone. the questions would help me link back and fill in this picture around pressure, agitation, cohesion. Where's the team at? Is their purpose clear? So that would be the starting point. And one of the pressures I would say I often face as an internal consultant is like often the most time that will get released to have an initial conversation is half a day. And part of me rallies against that and goes, we need more time, we've got to do more of this. And part of me is a pragmatist and says, if that first conversation generates the idea that then they need to have more conversations, then I would rather do that than lobby very hard to have a longer session. And so that is an internal, that's something as an internal consultant I have to be pragmatic about, is the amount of time I get to do this. But I take my measure of success as to whether the leadership team then says we need to generate and invest more time into this process. So very messy diagram, and I'm about to attach into the chat or a much neater one that will make this easier to see. So let me stop sharing for a moment. So I appreciate that I have shared a lot of info there. And we also have a Portuguese version. So let's also pop that in there. So I'd like to invite you back into your breakouts. I realize you might have lots of questions, but I'd like in the first round to invite you in your breakouts to go, what ideas does this stimulate for you, this way of thinking about teams and leaders? And also, what questions in general do you have about what I've just shared? So we're going to give you a pretty generous 15 minutes for this breakout, and then we'll spend the rest of the time together unpacking your questions and what insights this brings up for you. So before you went to breakout, there were a few questions that were posed in the chat. So I'll start off by responding to some of those questions. And then what I'd love to do is to get into sampling some of the breakout rooms. Obviously, we won't be able to hear from everyone given the size of the audience, but I'd love to get a sense of the flavor of the conversation in your room. So have a think about whether you're happy to speak up and contribute in a moment. So Nick asked, do you always start with outside pressures? That's a fascinating question. And the answer is yes, I do. That's absolutely my frame of reference whenever I consult or coach with a team, is that I start with what is it that's acting upon you as a team that might be either causing you to cohese together and be an integrated and well-formed team, or what is it that's kind of driving you apart and causing agitation within the team. That's my particular frame of reference. That's the way I like to think about teams, is I go outside in rather than inside out in my method. Graham, you asked, is this a version of Steeple? I think Steeple reminds me of Pestle. So Steeple's like Pestle. Yes, it is. It's like, do that environment scan, politics, environment, sustainability, legal, all those kind of aspects. Byrne, in his writing, said all of those things had a massive impact on what any team or group was trying to do, and more than perhaps we would sometimes ascribe. So I always start with that external kind of analysis. So, and Rachel, you asked, could you share what kind of questions you use in this early diagnostic phase? So I would tend to customize the questions for every engagement that I do, but I am like obviously drawing upon a fairly similar set of questions. So I would always have in my question set something along, what do you understand the purpose of this team to be? I would ask a question like that. I would ask a question related to agitation within the team. So what recent disruptions or experiences have the team had? So I do like going back to recent events to understand what it is. And what I'm less interested in is, oh, so-and-so and so-and-so had an argument about this. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm like, can we go back to like, what was the root cause of the issue that you were trying to deal with? And in that kind of critical incident type of debrief kind of way, understand what was it that drove or kind of considered that. I do explicitly ask about the role of the leader. So I will always, and again, not for there to be a personality analysis of the leader, because I don't always think that's helpful, but I ask about what role does your leader play in leading this leadership team, because there's always a different answer. So I try to give space to the team to kind of work through that. So a whole variety of questions, and then I will also follow the kind of the lead, so to speak. If new information comes up, then I'll keep probing to see what the connections might be, all of the time trying to build this rich picture of what's going on. So, David, you asked a really interesting question about, can the pressure come from the leader and their behaviors? There was one word that I didn't talk about when I did my diagram, and it's a very peculiar English word called proclivities. It's not one that you use in daily language or daily speech. It's like a challenge any of you to find proclivities in anything in your daily speech. But what proclivities basically means is, it's what's my inclination? How do I show up in the world? And Byrne had a really strong argument that people's proclivities are only a very small part of how a team operates. So I know there's other views of team psychology that would say the individual personalities are very, very important, and when you put them all together, you get this output. Byrne would say, no, I don't subscribe to that. Proclivities create a bit of day-to-day excitement and a little bit of frisson, perhaps a little bit of tension, but they're not the material part of how a team operates. So this is to do with this idea in transactional analysis that it's all the outside forces and the purpose of the team that are actually more important. And the even more provocative part of what Barb was saying is the way people behave in a team is a result of what that team is there to do. So you take them out of that environment, and this is how you get explanations about why people are so different in work environment or work roles to, say, personal lives and personal roles. So Byrne had quite a provocative and strong point of view on that said, that's their behavior is driven by whatever it is that group is there to do. So the leader is important. It's very, very important in Byrne's model, but the leader's individual personality in TA we would see as far less important than what are the forces that the leader is experiencing, that they are having to deal with and respond to, and how do they respond to challenges within the team. One of the things that's quite interesting in Byrne's thinking is that he said what is very, very common and very prevalent in leadership teams is that team members are always testing the leader. They're always testing the leader to see how they would respond. And I don't mean in terms of an intellectual challenge, let's have a discussion about strategy, let's resolve this. He doesn't mean that. He means at an unconscious level that what people are trying to check out is, does the leader favor me more than another? And you can see that he might have drawn that idea from family dynamics. And this is again quite an interesting idea. All of us, our very first experience of being in a group, which Byrne would call this, is our family of origin. That's our very first experience of a group. Now, and as we kind of grow up and we kind of work through life, we then have our first experience of being in a workplace or a work-based team. And that very first experience of a workplace team can often be our template without even realizing unconsciously for how to behave in a team. So if we have a very, very bad experience in our first workplace team, that might even be traumatizing and stick with us. If we are lucky and have an amazing experience in our first workplace team, then you might be disappointed when you enter other workplace teams. So there's this kind of templating idea that Byrne had around the idea of how you hold a group in your head. And there's a whole nother part of TA, which we haven't got time to go into today, which is around how people psychologically carry the image of the team that they're in. I would love to invite some contributions from the room. So yeah, it would be great to hear anyone who wants to start us off, a little bit of playback from your room, questions you had, insights that it generated, what did it provoke in your 15-minute conversation? So, and all we need is one brave soul to go first, and then I'm sure the rest will follow.
Hello, James. I'll jump in.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
We somehow found ourselves in physics and chemistry analogies, and even though we were not physicists or chemists,
Wow.
but what got us there was this idea of cohesion versus agitation, and this sort of metaphor of cohesion being something that holds together, and the forces are sort of holding all the parts in a stable way, versus a sort of an unstable compound that where the molecules or atoms are agitated, are moving. And so
Yeah.
we explored a little bit about what we thought that agitation could be. And, straight away, we obviously got to sort of conflict, and we thought, well, that could be conflict within the team and within the team members, or it could be conflict between the team and other parts of the organization, or the organization as a whole. But we also then thought about what else could that agitation mean. And this was speculative, because you may well tell us that we were right or wrong, I don't know. But, uncertainty, insecurity, instability were other things that came up when we thought, what do we think agitation probably means?
Yeah, I think all of that's really, really legitimate. And those words that you just used in the end of your sort of summary there, those are words that we would hear commonly in organizations all over the world at the moment. And where does that uncertainty or those feelings of security come from? It could both be from the outside world, but it could also be from within the organization. And sometimes the way I think about this is, in some organizations, some departments are favored or are seen as the ones that get all the resources and the investment, and others are seen more as kind of poor cousins. And so you can also have internal dynamics within an organization that might cause those sort of feelings, as well as kind of external pressures. And my invitation when I work with teams is to kind of say, right, if that's what you're experiencing, how do you attribute that? Where does that kind of come from? And often there is some sort of cultural, external factors, some sort of historical reason. That was something that I find in a lot of my team coaching work, is often something is a bit buried in history. It might be a leader back. Someone made a decision. People have forgotten that the decision has been made. And then they sit around the table and they have a realization, why are we doing it like this? And someone pipes up, well, so-and-so made a decision 10 years ago that was the way we were going to operate. So sorry, I've digressed a bit, Joe, but yeah, that would be, and I love the chemistry and physics metaphor, because Byrne was very much a polymath. He drew from all sorts of fields in his thinking. And so, yeah, he although he was a psychologist by training, he liked to look at other disciplines as well. So thank you. Okay, let's hear another contribution, if we may.
Maybe put your hand up if you'd like to share back from your group. It'd be great to hear your reflections or questions. Lou.
Hi. Yeah, great presentation so far, James. I'm not as familiar with this, so I need to go and research it. But I was just thinking of your diagram in terms of, in today's world, in today's kind of biosphere.
Yeah.
And we spoke about our group. We had a really rich conversation. We talked about, I think it was Liz who mentioned that, we are in ourselves a system in a system. It's like we are nested in this system. And then I was thinking, you've got your arrows coming in with the external pressures coming in. But now if I think about, triple materiality, double materiality, what about the inside out, in the sense of what impact does that does what the company does have on the external world in the context of approaching 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries? And so I don't know whether this is now updated, obviously 1960s, and it's still relevant, which is brilliant. And I've recently done the Fritjof Capra's Living Systems course, which is amazing. And to me, there's so many levels of complexity here, as we spoke about. So much relationality. How do we hold the space for individuals in that, in that process? To stop overwhelm or burnout,
Well, it's such a good question, because I have chosen to explain this rather simplistically, and also very much a limitation of my drawing skills. But you're absolutely right. If I extend the metaphor of what I drew, that leadership team that I showed on the screen is also exerting pressure on all sorts of other teams. So that's the first thing to say. So there would be pressure arrows coming out of that team. Naturally, most leadership teams that I work with are preoccupied with their own, what's going on for them, and far less concerned about whether they're having a detrimental impact on another leadership team. But yes, you could really three-dimensionalize this out to show all the other teams that that particular team is impacting. And you could also then say, well, this particular organization, what impact does it have on society and other partner organizations? So I love your extension of the metaphor. So thank you. Yeah, it's just beyond my drawing skills. Craig, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, James. So we had a couple of questions in our group that came up. One was around, are there specific examples where this has been a particularly sort of powerful intervention that's really shifted things? So sort of use cases. We also were wondering about, are there specific sort of conditions that might be required for this to work to be effective? And then lastly, we were just holding this question around, actually, how do you respond to that pressure then?
Yeah.
So,
okay. So now
there's a lot there.
Yeah, it's quite a lot of. So I think I like to be really transparent. Often I will get an inquiry that says we have a problem with psychological safety. All right, that's often like how I will get called in. So that's the beginning of the commission, so to speak. And I don't know about all of you on this call, but what I notice in Google is that psychological safety is a very loosely used term. It can mean so many different things. And people, like, if I ask all of you on the call to, some of you might be very good at like saying, here's Amy Edmondson's definition, and I use that strictly. But your average leader, they use the term lazily. So I will then go in and I'll say, okay, let's unpack that in the way that I've suggested. So that would often be my starting point, is I get a loose presenting issue and I need to get more precise. And the way that I do that is by doing more of a systemic analysis. In answer to your question about kind of a use case or where this has a really high impact, what I would say, and I'm sure many people on the call will resonate with this, is you have to have people who are willing to lean into the work. And there's a readiness thing. Leadership teams aren't always willing to do that. Now, usually if I get the call, so to speak, because that's what happens, is I receive a request for assistance, it means someone in the team wants to do the work. But sometimes as you commence the work, what comes out is uncomfortable or difficult to absorb, or to even, it's quite confronting sometimes, this way of working. And sometimes the work stops because the leader is not ready, or the team is not ready to be able to kind of deal and have that level of conversation. And I'm okay with that. And I will say to the leader, I don't think we're ready to progress this work beyond the initial diagnosis. Or that will be part of the conversation with the team live, is the resistance to entering particular types of conversations. And the final part of your question, which is kind of how do you deal with this external pressure? I think that requires quite a philosophical shift, I would say, for some leaders, because many of the leaders I work with in Google are addicted to spreadsheetable action plans, and very, very tangible outputs. And I'm like, you can't solve Trump. You can't predict the future of AI, etc., etc. You have the ability and the constraints that you have. So what we can do is sense make together. All we can do is account for what we know, make sense of it together. But often I find that what I'm doing is I'm inviting a team into a more reflective place. People will often say, that was a bit like group therapy. And I'm like, have you ever been to group therapy? And they've gone, no, I haven't. But I imagine that's what group therapy would be like. And I suppose I'm okay with that analogy, because what it means is it's a different type of conversation. It's a different level of understanding and dropping into that type of conversation. So that's what I would encourage teams to do, is to have that. But there is a readiness aspect. Some teams don't want to go there at that stage. Marjorie.
Thank you, James. I think, first of all, just to say that in your earlier piece, you said about, I don't know if this is unique to Google, that when you go in, people say this person's not getting on with this person and this team's not getting on with this. I don't think that's unique to Google. I think quite a lot of us can identify with that. But I think the thing, I really like that sort of holistic, analysis of where the team is at. But how do you transfer that into the team? Because sometimes the team actually hearing each other say those kinds of things, or a safe level, can be quite kind of emergent in itself. And I just wondered, how do you then not become like the custodian of all that insight and intelligence about the team?
Well, one way I will do it is that I will never do a presentation back of the themes. I will write a report, and I will a brief report, usually a couple of pages and no more. And the way that I would invariably start the conversation is that I would get the team to discuss the report in pairs or trios and let them own the feedback, so that I'm not getting in the way of that. Because you're absolutely right. I don't want to be suddenly the librarian or the kind of the owner of the truth. And I think the way I think about it is that I have a disproportionate workload at the beginning of the process, and my touches need to become lighter and lighter the further that I go into the process. So there is, and this is not a question that you asked, but one of the things that I'm very focused on at the beginning of a team coaching engagement is improving the quality of dialogue and listening amongst the team. And there's some fairly straightforward ways in which I do that, in that I insist that every voice comes into the discussion fairly early on, and that people give people a respect, and the conversation doesn't ramble and go off into lots of different discussions. So I'll be quite structured in that initial part of my engagement, so that the team learn how to do that discipline, and I'll stick with the team until they've learned that discipline, and then hopefully they'll become self-managing or self-running, in that sense of sometimes we need to stop and make sure we hear from everyone around the table before we proceed. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sarah. Oh, you're on mute.
Eu vou falar em português.
Ok.
Eu sou apaixonada por análise transacional, li quase todos os livros do Bernie e fico feliz do seu approach com análise transacional. Minha pergunta é: como você lida, ou se você já lidou, quando o líder é extremamente narcisista e a equipe é uma equipe assustada porque ele é tão brilhante que a equipe não se posiciona? Você já teve alguma experiência desse tipo?
Okay. James, just checking if you got the English translation, otherwise I can translate for you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was meant to change chat.
No.
Sorry.
That's all right, I can help you.
Okay,
Sarah is saying that she's a big fan of a transactional analysis, and that she's really happy that you have this approach as well. And she's asking, how do you deal with a leader when the leader is so narcissist that the team is scared because he's so brilliant that they cannot say anything back to the leader? So have you faced this situation in your professional experience?
Yes, I have. Yes. Now, I want to qualify one of my earlier comments. So I talked about how the behavior of individuals is often a feature or a function of the group. I think narcissism is one of the exceptions. So a highly, highly narcissistic individual is so wrapped up in their own process, and I'm generalizing here, by the way, but they're so wrapped up in their own process that to be able to conduct this sort of work would be extremely difficult. And I think when I've encountered this, and I have encountered it in Google, the work is often with the leader of that leader, and raising awareness of the type of impact they have on their team, and raising accountability with that leader to say, are you happy? Or it's not, are you happy? Will you tolerate this level of disruption and fear that is being caused by the actions of this particular leader? And I invite accountability up, basically. That's, I think, I don't know honestly whether I would take on the work of working with the team in that situation, because I don't know that I could do anything productive that would help the team. That would be my take. But yes, I have encountered it, and it's very unpleasant. Yeah. I know we're running.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hope that made sense. Yeah.
James, there's a question just in the chat there. I think you said that just around, I suppose, the practicalities in terms of the duration of a process. How do you typically kind of create that flow? What might that look like?
Yeah. So the information if I go for the white glove process that I described, the information gathering would often take maybe a couple of weeks. I might need then a week for kind of processing the information and refining that. Usually the way it works in Google is that the opportunity to do work of this nature is at an offsite or an onsite or some quarterly gathering of the team. So I'm often very restricted availability wise. And then at the end of that first intervention with the team, or whatever I've kind of done with them, I'll then be contracting with the team for how much more they need to do. And it is totally dependent on the scale of the issues and what they're trying to challenge. Sometimes I have worked for 18 months with a leadership team, and sometimes actually 3 hours was all it took to unlock something, and they're good. And so, yes, the judgment will be made after that first session as to how much longer I would need to engage with. But in Google, I don't come in with you're going to get 4 to 6 team coaching sessions. We would rarely get that kind of permission, in inverted commas. Yeah.
And maybe one more question from Raya, and then we'll close out the session.
Thank you. I want to continue the previous answer and the question, like when you work with a narcissistic manager, and maybe I don't see the difference between internal and external coach, but how it will work, the confidentiality with the way that you go to the manager of the manager.
So as I sit in the HR function in Google, which means that I've got 2 kind of codes, if you like, that I operate to. One is Google's code of conduct, and then the second is additional responsibilities that are placed on HR people. So in that situation, I am obliged to report any instances that I am made aware of bullying, harassment, intimidation, and that overrides confidentiality. So that is a really clear difference between an internal and external coach. I have to do that, otherwise I'll be kind of breaking my employment contract. And I do actually say that when I'm contracting, everything that you share with me in these conversations where I'm in discovery mode is confidential unless you name something that's a code of conduct violation, in which case you need to understand that I am duty bound to basically raise it and push it through the investigation system that we have. So that's how I deal with that. So, and I feel bad that there are lots of questions that I
know. We can stay on for hours. James, thank you so much. That's been a wonderful, practical, and very tangible walk through your work and your experience. So thank you for that. I'm really reminded in taking away, a few key things: the importance of boundaries. A reminder of the complexity that we work with when we're working with teams, and therefore establishing those boundaries and that contracting up front is really important. I love your kind of your stance around coming from the outside in, those external pressures, and what does that start to mean around those two lovely terms, the agitation and the cohesion. So thank you for sharing that. There was so many questions around the leader, in the chat, but that, kind of view of what can drive the leader's behavior, and how you can support the leader within that. And finally, then that reminder of readiness, the importance of just checking around the readiness. And it's okay if the team or the leader are not yet ready. That's okay. We can come back to that.
And thank you, Caroline. And I wanted to say that there will be a handout that comes with definitions of everything that I've shared today. My email address is on the bottom there. I'm very happy to follow up. If you've got a question that wasn't answered, just email me and I'd be happy to answer it for you. So thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate being in a community of people who do like work. It's very kind of soul affirming. So thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, James, for gifting us your time.